Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Danny D from Cherry Creek Radio, and I'm glad to join us this afternoon for the Montana Downtown Forum. We've got a wonderful presentation today from Mr. Day. Scott Day is here with us from San Antonio, Texas, and is the owner of Urban Development Services. Going to talk about specializing in urban design, urban development, retail economics, and everything that goes along with that. There is a full description there in your program. We will have a question and answer session after the presentation, so do save your questions, write those down, make sure and remember those for the end of the session. And also, please put your cell phones on vibrate or turn them off if you would, please. It's kind of an embarrassment more for you than it is anything, especially when it's this small of a setting. And if everybody's ready, we'll get started. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Scott Day.
Oh, thank you. It's even worse is when the presenter's phone goes off in the middle of the session, right? So I had that happen once, and it was I thought I had it turned off, and it was on vibrate, and it was on the podium next to the mic, and it went, and it was like, what's going on here? So anyway, good afternoon. Thank you for coming and spending some time here. What we want to talk about today is looking at the graphic image of your downtown. And when I say graphic image, what we're really going to focus in on are the business signs themselves. Obviously, there are other forms of graphic information in your downtown. There's wayfinding signs, there's street signs, any type of public improvement identity signs that you may have, those sorts of things. And that's really kind of a whole nother session. We want to talk about how we can get the private sector, get them to kind of come along and buy into an improved design, graphic image for your downtown. If you've never really thought about it, next time you're in your own commercial district, step out on the street, stand back, take a look at the street, and look at how much of your downtown's identity occurs as a result of the signs that are within the downtown, whether it's flush mounted or projecting, or whether they're on storefront windows, or all kinds of different ways in which businesses communicate about their wares and what they have to offer. A large part of what you see are the graphics in the downtown. So we want to talk about how to manage that. And by manage, I guess what I'm really getting at is how do we strike a balance between letting the businesses be creative and having flexibility, encouraging them to have good signs, but at the same time we have to kind of get everyone to kind of go along so that nobody doesn't get into a competitive environment where it's I need to have a bigger sign than my neighbors, and bigger is better and louder and brighter. So we kind of have to strike a little bit of a balance in that regard. So with that as sort of an entrance segue into the topic, what did you come here this afternoon wanting to get out of this session? Because we're a small enough group, as we go through, I can certainly focus on things and leave other things behind if they're not as relevant. Anyone with specific burning graphic? Yes?
I wondered if you would address trees on Main Street, and especially if the main foliage is just usually about the same level as the fence and where it's going.
Okay, actually, you know what? I'm going to shut the door across here so that these folks don't. Yeah, in terms of trees, that I've actually seen, and unfortunately don't have any images in here of it, trees that have been just truncated or severely so people can see signs in downtowns. And street trees are, an important part of the built environment, and where you put them and how you place them is very important to the overall downtown. I don't have a lot of images, though, of the street trees in here. As I go through, I might try and point a couple things out for you. So, good, okay. Any other things that you guys came here wanting to hear about? Yes?
Well, probably, I think you mentioned the balance between what you'd like to see and what the businesses want to see. And to some way, probably in a softer way, guide that to a vision, to a common vision. Okay, good. All right, we'll hit that. That works. Yes?
Well, and sort of the economics of convincing a business that there's a return on investment for that kind of an expenditure there.
Yes.
And how to quantify that and figure out other ways that maybe we can incentivize the businesses to put them on, especially if they're absentee or owners of the properties.
Good point. I actually, I don't have it in here. I've got it on my computer, and I can show you later on if you're curious. Howell, Michigan was doing merchandising workshop up there this spring, and one of the businesses we were working with was a toy store. And they had been out on the edge of town, and they moved their business into the downtown. And the first 2 months, they didn't have any sign. They were just getting going. It was a quick move, fast move for them in the downtown area. They put up their sign, and their sales went up by some. Okay, this is the point where those of you on the tape, don't quote me on this. I want to say they went up somewhere like in the neighborhood like 200% as a result of putting up their sign. So it goes to show you how important having a good quality sign is. And it was nicely done. It was tastefully done. It was creative, and fun use of color, but they didn't paint the whole building a bright color palette. It was just they concentrated on the sign. So it was a great example of what you can do with signs. And yeah, in terms of return on investment, I think their sign was somewhere maybe about $1,000, something like that. And what the profound impact that had on their sales, it's amazing. So yes, good signs are a good investment. Good. Yes.
Signs that will work inside of the law. For us, we have 2 of our main streets in our downtown district are highways. So they can't jut out into at all.
The DOT is, yeah, it's state highway or federal? State?
State.
How far do you have between the curb and the front of the building?
They cannot jut out, I don't think at all. I don't know what it is, but we've had some that have had to take theirs down. So now we have almost the effect of nobody's even putting any up because they don't want to have to go through the process. So it's been a real backlash.
Okay, interesting.
Well, Lewistown and Main Street, State Highway, they don't have that problem.
Yeah. It could be that if you have a very narrow sidewalk, the type of sign, if it's close to traffic signalization, those sorts of things can start to crop into it. Especially if it's an older sign that had some sort of electrification and lots of lighting in it, and lights in particular that were yellow or red, that kind of start to bleed into the cross section, then that can be a little bit of an issue. But I would think in general, once you get back from the intersection, there's an opportunity to have some degree of projecting signs in the downtown. So that's good. Well, I'll show you some examples here, some things later on. Maybe we can look at that. That's interesting. Good. Okay. Anyone else before we jump in?
Well, did you, a few minutes ago in your introduction, did you say get private sector buy-in of improved downtown images?
In terms of an improved graphic image, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm with Great Falls, and we have just unveiled a brand new logo as of July 1st for our downtown. And we have told every single business owner downtown, this is your logo, it's downtown's logo, utilize it. And it's been great to see some of our larger stores utilizing it, because we're hoping the smaller ones will start to follow.
Huh.
But we're trying to sell that new.
Trying to get them to drop it into advertisement or websites or
Yes.
any of that stuff. Yeah, good. So really doing a brand image for.
Exactly. And we wanted
downtown.
to create top of mind awareness that downtown, and this is tied to downtown, and we want to go downtown, and people will see that and think downtown right away. So.
Good. Okay. Let me dim the lights. Yeah.
Yes, one other thing, what about the use of the electronic signs? And, they're becoming quite prevalent, and certainly are eye-catching.
Video, digital imagery. Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
It can be loud, bright.
Yeah. Again, I think it's one of the things that there's a time and place for everything. And, someone said back here, ugly or loud or those sorts of things. And it all depends on the type of commercial district. If you're an entertainment district, it may be okay. If you're Bourbon Street, maybe. If you're Great Falls, Montana, maybe not. So those are things that we want to talk about here in a minute, is trying to figure out what's appropriate at the local level. So good comment. Yeah. Okay. Does that mess you up too much? You're good on the. Okay. All right. As Danny said, if maybe try and hold questions at the end. But if there's something as we go through, if it doesn't make sense, by all means, we're not a huge group. You can raise your hands. Like right now, this doesn't make sense, does it? You should be raising your hands. No, this is obviously a historical image of sprawl. I want to say not necessarily its infancy, but back in the 70s, the American landscape was quickly becoming a sea of signs, and it was an area where everything was bigger and bigger was better, and it was all about me, see me, and eventually you just get everyone shouting, and it just becomes this cacophony of overbearing signs. What was going on though is the people in the sign industry were stocking these types of signs and selling these types of signs, and so they went to the downtown locations and said, you know, your competition out on the edge of town has that type of sign, and so you need to have a big sign as well to keep up with the times. And if you look at that, I mean, you know, first of all, maybe it doesn't look so big, but then all of a sudden you see the scale. I mean, here's a 6-foot figure. You know, these are signs that are 3 and 4 feet high. The difference, though, is that out on the highway, you're driving by at 40, 50 miles an hour. When you start moving at those types of speeds, your field of vision, meaning sort of that cone of vision about where you look, is much narrower than it is in downtown if you're moving at 20, 25 miles an hour. And so as a result, bigger signs, bigger letters are kind of somewhat come into play out on the commercial strip. Now, in a downtown though, if you have an 8-inch high letter and your street, building facade to building facade across the street is 80 feet to 100 feet, you're going to be able to read an 8-inch high letter easily across the street. So we'll talk a little bit about what's an appropriate size of sign and letters in a little more detail here. Sign ordinances. Having a complete up-to-date ordinance will eliminate many of the unsightly elements that detract from your downtown. The intent of the ordinance is to encourage creative approaches to sign design and to enhance the overall visual environment. You often hear, though, that sort of criticisms of design guidelines in general or sign ordinances is that, oh, you're going to take away from the creative side of things. I find that if it's a good ordinance, there's public input, and you've had public sessions that encourage input on those things, that you get buy-in on the ordinance, and it doesn't really take away from creativity. My approach on all this is that, my approach on all of this is that there's a lot of different ways you can graphically communicate what it is that you're trying to sell in your business. And we shouldn't discourage that creativity, but we do kind of need to keep it within some overall boundaries. The other side of it, though, is that if you look back at these types of situations, what happened as a result of this, a lot of communities said, no more projecting signs. We think they're ugly. We think we look too much like Las Vegas. For now on, everything is going flush mounted against the building, and you only get 10 square feet of sign. That's it. And as a result, to me, I think as the pendulum has swung the other way, is a lot of communities kind of started to get very sterile looking in their appearances. And so, trying to find that balance is a tricky thing to do, but I think it can be done. The benefits of a good sign ordinance: economic vitality to attract new businesses and new shoppers, improve quality of life and general appearance, retain or improve property values, and to put commercial properties on a more even playing field. And what we're getting at in that last one is that, especially when we're dealing with a lot of small entrepreneurs, independent businesses in our downtowns, if one of the first things you have to do as a new small business is go fork out $5,000, $6,000 to get a sign where you can be heard or seen or recognized in the downtown, that's a major expense. So if we kind of keep the overall price tag down a little bit, I mean, if people want to spend that much, they still can, but if we keep our sizes a little more within some boundaries, that means that someone can start out their business, they can put $5,000 or $4,000 into something else in their business instead of having to dump a lot of money into their overall signs. And I'll show you some inexpensive signs here in a minute. A lot of different problems here is if you don't start to regulate it, is you get a lot of sign stating a lot of things and redundant things. Ball office supply. And in case you didn't catch it again, we'll put it one more time on the overall building facades. To me, the A-frame signs, there's people that have invested good time and money and effort and have done a nice job. This is one in northern Michigan. Then if we go over to a small town in Missouri, this is kind of was done in somebody's back shop and put out there, kind of spare the moment. Both signs are about the same size. Both signs are pretty much the same materials. It's just that one has a little more of a professional edge to that, and so it has a completely different look. This is another community that has having sort of A-frame-itis. And, everyone all of a sudden, I guess they relaxed the ordinance, and, someone got the flip chart out and they were writing on that. That works fine until the wind blows it over every afternoon. This is the chalkboard, not too bad. And then here's sort of the franchise one. So there's all kinds of different things. Some of them more successful than others, but again, how do you get the bottom quality up? And generally I find is that when you do have good ordinances, it does bring that bottom quality up. And generally it does not take away from the top end creativity side of things. So you're going to find that it raises the bar overall. Other sort of incidental signs, open signs have an impact. What's considered a sign, those are things to think about. I could put my standard vending machine in here, but there it is. It's a half of a giant Coke bottle sawed off, and they sell Cokes out of that. For all purposes, really is advertising, and it is a vending machine. Some people use their windows as signs, particularly those businesses that sell very small items. Jewelry stores are good examples of that. That sometimes they want to just do a larger sign instead of doing the display window and just call it a day. Here, we'll just put a big sign up that says jewelry and be done with it. Whenever buildings come down in downtowns and you have an alley that suddenly is highly visible, people put things on the back sides there. Affinity signs. I guarantee you at this point, no one is walking into that store looking at all those. You need to scrape off the old affinity signs. And frankly, if you, MasterCard and Visa, they always like to have you that, or American Express, whoever, they like you to have those things on the door. Almost all businesses take those anymore. So having them out there, I don't know if it's really, I'd rather reserve it by the register somewhere in the front of the store. To me, that first pull of the door, that first entryway into your door, your storefront, is so critical in terms of establishing the perceived value of your merchandise, that when you start to overwhelm it with lots of signs and too much merchandise or not good displays, it really starts to devalue, or can devalue, what's going on inside your store. So where do you want to start with the sign ordinance? Well, first of all, read your ordinance. If you've never read it, you need to do that. Secondly, when you look at that, one of the things I always look for is making sure that within your sign ordinance, you may have common language for the entire community, but when you get down to the actual parts of regulation, there should be a specific part of the sign ordinance that deals specifically with downtown. The design standards for what happened out on the strip are completely different set of environmental conditions from what we're looking at in the downtown area. So you need to have a subsection that deals specifically with your commercial district. If you're a big enough downtown like a Missoula or like a Billings, it's perfectly realistic. You may even have a sub-district of your downtown to be broken out. If there's some sort of very historical portion of your downtown, I've seen that occur as well within overall ordinances. Secondly, step two, understand your market's demographics. Who you sell to is very, very critical in terms of having an ordinance that works well for you. If it's a very upscale, high-end market, that's going to be a different set of parameters. If it's a more family-oriented, more moderate price point, that's going to be a different set of parameters. If it's casual, recreational, probably a different set of design criteria. I always look at, and I apologize, a little of this got cropped off. There are basically 9 different squares that which we can market to, sort of theoretically, we can market our products and services to in our downtown area. You can have lower price point, you can have moderate price point, or you can have higher price point, and you can have traditional, contemporary, high-tech, and funky. Each of those market segments will have different sets of design characteristics that the customer will respond to based upon other experiences in their life. And to give you an example, if I walk into a very high-end traditional store, this is a Laura Ashley store. If you look at the type font on the windows, it's a little more reserved. It's not big, it's not bold, it's not flashy. The type font is an old English type font. The dresses are full-length cut, and on their window it says London, Paris, New York, Geneva, Amsterdam, all the places that you and I travel to on a weekly basis. No, we don't. But what they're trying to do is immediately at the curb line or at the storefront, raise that sort of snob appeal and get you accustomed to the fact that we're very prestigious and you need to be prepared to pay a lot when you walk in here. So a different set of characteristics. When you walk into those stores, natural wood floors. You're going to find time-tested, well-accepted merchandising props, sort of antique types of things. That's going to be a stark comparison if you get over in the sort of stripped-down contemporary arena, where it says Anthony's. A great store you can plug in there would be Target. And you walk into Target and it's really just the merchandise that sells itself. It's the color, the settings, maybe the fixtures a little bit, but it's very stripped down and the merchandise itself sells itself. And if you get over here in the high tech and the funky and the low price point, that's probably the used clothing store in the college town. Different set of design parameters that people will respond to. So what I'm getting at here is probably more than anything is that the materials, the colors, those things in your signs are going to say a lot about who it is that you're trying to sell to as a retailer. How big your sign is will connotate a lot about value and price of your merchandise. And I'll show you some examples of that here in just a second. Whoops. There we go. If you look at that, I mean, that's low price point. And what tells us low price point? Lots of merchandise, off-brand, stacked up in the windows. If you look inside, fluorescent tube lighting on the ceiling. That's your standard dime store, dollar store in the downtown area. On the other end, as a high-end example, you can't even read this from where you're at. 2-inch letters on a highly polished brass plaque. You ring the bell to have them come and wait on you at the door and make an appointment to go in and shop. That basically says take out a home improvement loan. Forget about all your credit cards. You need a bigger line of credit. They show one of something in the window. So again, different parameters in terms of what it is you need to do in terms of your sign. And I'll give you another example here. You look at that Peristyle. There you can see it's Peristyle at severe deep discounts. Those letters are 3-4 feet high. They take up the entire facade. So if you look at that, fairly low price point. Now, would I recommend that you have to do that? No, especially if you look at the context of the rest of the street, it's kind of an overpowering sign. But what my point here is that a bigger sign, though, is going to appeal to a different segment of the market. And you need to understand who that is that you're selling to. There you go. So this is the one I like. This is Cosgrove's Lunch, White Star Lunch in Frederick, Maryland. And you walk in there, you get a cup of coffee and a sandwich for about $3, $4, and it's a great value. It's not a gold leaf sign, it's white tempera paint put onto the window, classic type font. It's not an elaborate type font. It just says, we are what we are. What you see is what you get when you come in here for lunch. And I think it does a great job of marketing to that traditional customer. So secondly, as I said, understand your market. Third, conduct an inventory. And what I'm actually doing here is starting to set you up for things that the courts have supported. And not that I hope you ever get to the point where your sign ordinance is going to be litigated, but what you want to do is avoid falling into a situation where people do want to say, oh, you're taking away from my property rights. You're going overboard with your sign ordinance. No, that's not what we want to do. But the courts have upheld things regarding to size, location, type, amount, and number of signs. Those things are all important. So we want to start to look at an inventory out there on the street that says, okay, who's pushing the limit? Who has the most signs? Who has the biggest sign? What are those special situations? We need to kind of understand where the boundaries are being pushed, where the ordinance is working, where it's not working. Are there historical signs? Very, very important, because you'll find that there might be some great landmark features, great identifying features in our downtowns that no longer conform to the sign ordinance because the sign ordinance has been modified, and so those things are going to be grandfathered. Typically, when you get into those situations, I like to see communities go ahead and landmark those through a historical process so that there is a policy that's fair and equitable that deals with those. It's a special subgroup. That's why they're afforded that set of rights, and that's why other property owners aren't afforded that set of rights. Corner buildings will always be a big issue, or buildings. If you're a big enough town, I forget the Missoula, the name of the the old hotel over here that we're going to be at tomorrow night. What the Florence. That's almost a 360-degree, fills out the entire block type of building. It really has frontage on two streets. And also another situation there, it's kind of interesting, is that you've got a bigger facade and then you have lots of smaller businesses around that fill in on that. So there's different types of sign needs there within that type of situation. And then just look at all the different sign varieties that are out there on the street. And so this is my favorite part of the overall presentation, is just kind of show you, kind of where we started out in terms of signs, what's evolved, and why that's happened in our downtowns. Historically, we were a nation of immigrants. We didn't all speak the same language, and so putting symbol signs out there was a way in which we could communicate what it is that we sold. And you might not be able to see from where you're sitting, but here this is a oversized gun that was in front of the gunsmith shop. Next door is the watch fob at the jeweler, and then over here is the mortar and pestle out on the street. So symbol signs are very common for communicating what it is that we sold in terms of our products. And you look at the street here, I think this is in Mobile, Alabama, the large oversized donut, it kind of speaks to you. Sometimes we just quite simply painted things onto the building facade. Those are all historical examples. This is Stern and Nahm is one of my favorite buildings in Las Vegas, New Mexico. This is in Wisconsin, I think, and that's also Wisconsin, if I'm not mistaken. But just simply painted onto the building. Jim's Steaks, South Street, Philadelphia, an wonderful Art Deco building, painted onto the overall building facade. This is a new one. Well, I should say newer. This was done about 15 years ago. This is in Llano, Texas. And this is a business, and I said before, understand who it is that you're selling to and your product. The Acme Dry Goods Company sold a very middle market, traditional set of products to its customers. And so I think taking that approach from a traditional standpoint of painting it directly onto the buildings, using more of a serif or a script type font, and that traditional graphic works well for who it is that they're trying to sell to. Symbol signs, those are again sort of traditional example of those, the drugstore, the barber store, and the watchsmith. Contemporary examples, this is Coffee People. I think this one's out in Seattle, if I'm not mistaken, or it may be Portland, one of the two coffee cities there. But the latte straw, every now and then little puffs of steam come out the latte straw. The Portland Trailblazers basketball store downtown, oversized basketball. Chicago, my favorite one here is the dentist with the brush. I mean, you see that guy coming at you and your cavities are going to run screaming. This is in Kodiak, no, not Kodiak, Seward, I think I want to say Seward, Alaska, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so a guy that was from Los Angeles that worked in the movie industry went up there, was really good with sets. And he did the Cups Cafe. And you look at that, and this is kind of one of those things where, well, is it really a sign, or is it art, or is the facade? And it's so well done, nobody asks. And it really is, this is their sign, but you see the sculpture come to life. Now what's cool about this, and you can't see it right now, I don't have a shot of it at night because we weren't going to be there in order to take it. Those cups are all translucent, so the lights come on and they glow. And then the locals say, yeah, those things come on every night. You want to go sing Christmas carols underneath them, so they're so well done. On a smaller scale, though, this is Jim's coffee shop out in California. That's not super expensive. All of this installed, maybe a little over $1,000, somewhere in there between fabrication and getting it mounted. So you don't have to be super expensive in order to have a good sign. Historically, we started getting into electrification. A little after the turn of the century. This is Merchant's Cafe in Seattle. This dates from about 1890, I think is when the business came in. I don't doubt that that's their first sign. But early on, we just put bulbs that didn't do anything. They just lit up and they outlined the letters. But then later on, we started having other materials that came available to us, such as neon. And here you see that same sculptural cutout symbol sign that we saw earlier in the first slide. Now all of a sudden they're wrapping that in neon and doing contemporary examples of that. And the same with the shoe, updating that with neon. And there's our mortar and pestle again with neon. signs that were in transoms. Again, that's one of those things when you start doing storefront remodels, you may find those underneath. If that's the case, to me, there's kind of two options. One is you go ahead and you can go ahead and cover it sensitively up again, or you can just go ahead and let it be. And often, people are pretty good about understanding what that business is or isn't in terms of what's operating there based on the merchandise that's in the window. We had an office supply store in downtown Ottawa, Illinois many years ago. When they took off their transom panel that had been covered up, there was a great, I think it was A&P, it was the grocery store chain, sign that was up in its transom window. They had no idea that was in there because they couldn't see it from the inside. And everyone's like, oh, what's he going to do with that? It's such a great sign. You don't want to take that down. He said, you know what? Realistically, 50, 60% of my business comes, or phone-in orders. I don't care if that sign's up there. And after his storefront remodeling happened, they revealed that sign, they painted up his business. They still showed a 15% gain in his sales, despite having a sign that didn't quite match with his business, but he left that up there as a landmark feature. Your more enduring sort of institutional businesses will often do their signs either cut out of stone or cast. This is terracotta. This is Castle and Doyle, which sold coal of all things. This is their office on State Street in Madison, Wisconsin. Really beautiful building. That's all cast terracotta, as is their signage. The Coca-Cola guy and their sign. This is not too far away. Anyone know where that is? Oh, Bozeman, yeah. This is my all-time favorite sign. And by the way, whoever's here from Bozeman, I will buy you that piece of tile to put back on there, okay? It drives me nuts every time I look at that. It's like, oh, I wish they had that on there. But what a great sign. It probably took a few bucks, though, to do that. That's not super inexpensive. There are computer programs today, though, where you can, if you want to do something like this, you can go ahead and do your type font, and the computers can go ahead and set the type, the tile into a mosaic, and you can order it that way. Not super inexpensive, but probably cheaper than trying to sit there and do that by hand. So you can take pictures and turn those into mosaics, those sorts of things. This is one of those things that if you have them, I would say retain it. I don't encourage a lot of people. In fact, it's probably kind of cost prohibitive for most businesses today to do this. But during the 30s, 40s, and up into the 50s, we got a lot of terrazzo entryway signs, especially with your Art Deco facades. Unfortunately, every now and then I see people that come in along, it's like, it's no longer Maryland Shoes, it's going to be Jim's Clothing Store. It's like, well, it's a shoe store sign, it doesn't work for me. And they chisel all that out of there and they re-pour it or they tile it over. The inexpensive solution to this is to go get a really nice no-slip skid rug that you can roll out and put your own logo on that and just cover it up. If the shoe part of it really bothers you, you can go ahead and have a rug made to go in there and get a couple of them made so you can trade them out and wash them and clean them. That's much less expensive, plus it keeps the historical part of the sign intact. Letters just put onto the front of the building with a little bit of a raised stud. That gives you great shadow lines. Out on the canopies. There we see neon starting to come along. This one I like. This is in, if you haven't been to Savannah, Georgia recently, I would encourage you to go. Great, probably one of my top cities in the country. This used to be Harry Matthews Fish and Oyster Store, and then it got converted to Trattoria, a pizzeria, or Italian restaurant. They retained all of that. This was the type of neon that didn't have enameling onto the metal. Is painted, so they could change some of the colors and graphics there, but keep the rest of that in the electronics openings, and we're easily able to rework the sign. The best part is the fishtail that lights up at night and kind of goes back and forth slowly. And any of your old neon signs, hang on to those. Those to me are great landmark features in your downtowns. Now, this is kind of starts to, the next few slides kind of want you to get out of this, is that back in the late 1800s, turn of the century, signage was an afterthought and it was applied to your building. And then we get up in the 50s into the 60s, your building facade and your sign start to become one and the same. And so this is an important part of going out there and doing that inventory. When you start to look at sign ordinances, what's a sign, what's not a sign, you need to start looking at that. You see at the Uptown Drug Company here is that if you take away from any of these elements, the building facade design itself really kind of starts to fall apart. It's that intersection of the T over the window or over the doorways that really sets up that whole facade relationship, and that's very, very important. The Senator Theater, a great example here, is that the marquee without that backdrop of backlit glass block wouldn't be the same. Or if you take the marquee away, the backlit doesn't really do a lot of good either. So you need both of those things. The facade really has become the sign. If you look at this in Maxine's here, if you take that out, that really is the building facade, is that the lighting on top of the Maxine's at night. The glass block backlights the letters, and so it's kind of a reverse silhouette. So very nicely done. And here again, this is out in California, a flower shop. This is out on the edge of a canopy along the buildings. It's that play of shadow and sunlight onto the building facades. The letters are a matte color finish. The backdrop is a glossy finish. So you get that play and contrast between the two surfaces. And certainly if you haven't been to South Beach takes on a whole different appearance at night when the neon lights come on. And really, if you took away the signs in South Beach, you'd take away a lot of the major characteristic the identifying features of that. And that's true again of Art Deco, international style design buildings and from that era, is that the building facade and the sign really start to become one. So when you start looking at your sign ordinance and you start looking at it sort of from a stance of equitable and what's fair to everyone, it's not an easy answer in some situations depending upon what you have. Other things to take note of: ghost images on buildings. This is Ziles Ice Cream. This one's been around since late 1800s in Westminster, Maryland. They come out and they paint it. So previously this one they just kind of let it fade with grace. Here the product is still being sold. My approach is if the product is no longer sold, maybe we let it fade with grace, or we go ahead and maybe repaint it. Don't have to. If the product is still sold though, why not go ahead and continue to paint it? I prefer that you not clean them off of the buildings though. I think it's probably better to kind of keep them on there because I think that's some of your history, and that's what differentiates you from the strip centers and the shopping centers of the world. A couple of good examples here of signs. I said don't have to be expensive signs. This sign is only about 3 feet wide by about 4 feet tall. Now, in here that might seem a little bit big, but on most main streets, if you get a 3x4 sign out on the street, it seems to be pretty much in balance. If you have a very wide street, and you do have some wide streets here in Montana, you may want to stretch that a little bit. But again, this is where you can easily do this with Photoshop mock-ups. You can take a shot of the street, and you can go out and you can have someone hold a 3x4 sheet of paper on the street, and so you know what a 3x4 looks like, and you can size that at different sizes then, once you know that dimension, and you can figure out what is big and what's too big on the overall cross-section of the street. This one probably a little more elaborate. This is probably, I'd say maybe $1,500, $2,000. The leaves are quite nice, and the brackets a little more customized. This one probably not super expensive. This is just done on tile work and mounted up on the building facade. McDonald's. That is the McDonald's. This is the highest grossing McDonald's in the state of Maine. No golden arches. Up until recently, they had no drive-through. Finally, they succumbed to pressure from corporate and they put a drive-through on. It's the original Italian farmhouse, and on the back side are their kitchens. You can actually walk in and out the front door. It's not ADA accessible there, but on the back side they do have ADA accessible. And inside they actually have McDonald's version of Italian furniture that you can sit on. So it's kind of interesting. But again, doesn't show you have to have fall to the pressures of all the large corporate demands of what is required of franchisees. Whole Foods, same thing, very quiet and reserved. If you have a good product, people are going to find out about you and they'll know to come to you. This is in Frederick, Maryland. Frederick had a sign ordinance, a sign enhancement grant program, probably 15, 20 years ago, where they helped pay for the design of the sign, and they gave grants to people as well to help them upgrade their signs. This one is not super expensive at all. It's about 3 feet by 4 feet, and it's nothing more than a jigsaw cutout around the bakers. And so during the daylight, the light is silhouetting the bakers, and at night, the lights that you can't see right now cross-light the sign, and they too silhouette the bakers. So again, doesn't have to be super expensive, but it can easily catch your eye. This is also in Frederick, Maryland. This was Victorian Spirits, they used to be the store that took all the ads out of the Saturday evening paper, and they'd post them all over their windows, and you couldn't see in the liquor store. And most of their sales were Mad Dog, 2020 or whatever. And they said as a result of they said, we will buy you a new sign, but you have to take down all the newspapers. And they came back with the wine, the frog toasting the wine glass. They said as a result of that, their customer base changed. People came in starting wanting table wines and not fortified wines. And the owner said, wow, I never thought I could raise my price point of what I sold. Secondly, he said the customers got a whole lot easier to deal with too. So, these things can pay good dividends for you. All right, so 1, read your ordinance. 2, consider your customer market. 3, do your inventory of what's out there and start to understand what could and couldn't be. Then 4th is actually starting to look at your ordinance in terms of maybe the ways in which we need to tweak it. One of the key things to keep in mind is don't try to regulate on content. Content is protected by freedom of speech underneath the courts. Now, it can't be misleading. The signs have to be honest and forthright, but so that from that standpoint, you could possibly litigate it if something. But the courts have supported things that restrict size, height, location, time, structure, number of signs. All those things have been clearly upheld by the courts, and so you can regulate those types of things in your sign ordinance. So the bottom line here is it means that an adult establishment or liquor store, which a lot of people kind of view as your sin stores, have the same opportunities as any other business in the downtown. And I always hold my breath that the red square stays in place when I showed this sign, and so far it has. But if you go to New Orleans, hey, now it's not super risky, but for the purpose of the session, I always block it out. They kind of push the envelope a little bit in New Orleans, and they know how far they can go with that. But you are afforded the same opportunities, though, with your signs. Sign regulations, the courts say that content regulations are content neutral, time and place manner regulations. Regulation of these factors is unrelated to free speech. And the effective speech is incidental to the furtherance of public interest in traffic safety and aesthetics. Now, you can, what they're getting at here is signs that look like traffic signals or interfere with traffic signals, you can start to regulate those types of things. Most sign ordinances require that abandoned signs have to be removed after a period of time. Now again, carefully go through your downtown and see where you have abandoned signs. I've seen a couple instances where people say, hey, if you're going to make me take down my sign, that old theater over there is no longer a theater. Their sign has to come down too, because the person is saying, I don't want to take my sign down, knows that that'll be a hot button issue, and they're going to try and push the public to have to take down that marquee, knowing they won't take it down and that they won't come after this person. So that's what I'm saying. Things like marquees, you might say, hey, that building facade is historical, and that you protect that sign underneath an historical designation, but then the other signs that aren't conforming, then you can start to look at that. So somebody has other abandoned signs, you can start to pull those down. Now, often I find that a lot of your abandoned signs, if you tell someone that, hey, you need to take that down, they probably aren't going to do it. This is Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin, which is one of the first Great American Main Street Award winners nationally. They put together a facade facelifters group, and one of the first things they looked at doing was going through the downtown and taking down all the abandoned backlit signs that were in their downtown area. And people are saying, well, yeah, if you want to take it down, you can do it, but I don't want to pay to take it down. You can do it, though. And so with the aid of a licensed contractor who really accepted the vast majority of the risk here and the cost in doing this, the volunteer facelifters group went over and they took down those old signs. So you needed a qualified electrician to make sure that the electricity was cut off to the sign in a very safe manner. The volunteers in this instance played a fairly minor role, but it was, yes.
The sign base is gone. Is that considered taken down, or is that infrastructure?
No, that whole sign is considered to be abandoned at this point in time. Usually, a lot of time, your signs will have provisions. Your sign orders will have provisions in them after a period of time, after 30 days, which is kind of short. 60 days, 90 days, maybe a little more realistic. If that business ceases to exist, then the sign has to come down. Often, though, you'll see people kind of play games with that. If you ever see signs that get turned around, the panels are upside down, it no longer advertises the business per se, but the sign's still up there, and so they kind of keep it intact. But this is starting to kind of also get in the borderline of seriously abandonment, where you no longer have the inner workings being protected.
So if your sign ordinance has something about abandonment, how do you get that enforced? We had that exact issue in Great Falls. The property owner was refusing to pay for it, and the city wasn't doing anything about it.
Well, I guess I didn't say this directly the first time, is if you're just starting to do this, then I would say do as many carrots as you can. Say, look, we know it's abandoned. We know you got someone coming in. I don't know if that's the situation, but someone's going to come in and want to lease the space too. Well, let's look at a sign grant. We'll pay half the cost, up to $500, and we'll remove your old one.
Which is essentially what we wanted during the BID paid for it.
Yeah.
But the property owner occupies the space and didn't want to take the sign off. And
Yeah.
all the neighbors wanted the sign gone.
Yeah, and that's one of those things too, is that, you know, karma kind of goes around, and especially in small towns. So, you know, people know who's are supportive and who's with it and who's not. So, but I would say try and use as many incentives as you can. I had one guy that had, there's the old Rexall drugstore sign on the corner. It was a cool, you know, it was the orange enamel metal panel and the blue script on it. And I was kind of, being a preservationist, I thought it was kind of cool, let's leave it up there. But what happened after time is the mount started to come off, and this guy didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. And I knew he wasn't going to pay to fix it. And so I said, look, I'll pay you $50 for the sign. I'll take it down. The sign was worth way more than that. So, you know, as a collector thing, that was 25 years ago or something like that. But so anyway, but yeah, again, what's left over and abandoned, this is up in, it's a borough of New York City. I can't, it evades me right now. But anyway, these big canopy sign, or frames of the signs up here, those are the frameworks of old large A-frame signs that had lots of neon on them. And, you know, then they came down, and now other people are sort of reusing them. The Conway one has been reused. This one hasn't been reused. And, you know, let's also have maybe a little bit of discussion about amount of signs on the building facade. So that's all quite outrageous there. Okay, abandoned signs. Now, what can you do with it? 2 possible ways to deal with that. One is that if your sign permit lapses, then they need to be removed. And so I would encourage you, for all your major signs on building facades, they need to have a sign permit, which is kind of typical. Depending upon the type of sign, often they might need some sort of an engineer certificate if it's going to be a projecting sign. And then that also entitles you, as part of that sign permit, they have to renew that every year. And as a part of doing that, you have to go out and actually look to make sure that the mounts on the sign still look to be in good working condition. If there's any discussion there about whether they are or aren't, then you might have to have that business go back and have the recertification done by an engineer to make sure that the sign is in good working order. This is, if you can't see it, this is in New Jersey. Dunkin' Donuts used to be in this freestanding building, and then they moved back, and this is what I'm trying to show, they moved back over here to this other location. They still had the lease at this spot on the building, but the business license was no longer tied to that address. And so that's one of the ways in which you can do it, is if your business license is not tied to that address, then your sign permit automatically expires, and so then the sign has to come down. And if they don't do that, then they're subject to, I guess, fees or, you know, penalties at that point. Oops, I took that out. Impacts to traffic safety and aesthetics. I kind of started mentioning this before. Your size of sign, scale, height, location, material, lighting, color, motion or lack thereof, all those things the courts will support in terms of your regulations. The thing here, though, is you can't say, well, you know, adult establishments are only entitled to a sign this big, whereas clothing stores are entitled to signs this big. Everyone has to be treated uniformly and the same in that regard. And so that's what we're saying at the bottom here, is that the content, again, still needs to be neutral. So these things, when things start to deal with motion, I should probably have a video clip of this, but this is the guy that's, he's flipping around out there. Those can be starting to be considered a distraction to traffic. Here's one. This one's actually out on the or on the sidewalk, blocking the sidewalk, and when the wind blows the right way, it's almost whipping into to traffic. Basic distinction, so anyway, those things can be upheld for traffic. Another thing you can get at is sort of the temporary or permanent. A lot of people get hung up on this. I try to take a little slightly different approach when I look at ordinances and say that let's not worry about temporary signs or permanent signs. Let's just give the businesses an overall allocation of signage, and let's let them figure out how they want to use it. And whatever signs they put up, we don't care if it's considered to be permanent or temporary. If you have to discern between that and you really feel like people want to do that, then the basic way to look at that is permanent signs have some sort of a rigid mount to the ground or a pole. Temporary signs are usually sort of tied on to the overall facade. But there you go, you start to see that you get to be sort of a gray area. There's a lot of temporary signs that actually start to show up and become permanent signs. And so from an administrative standpoint, it's kind of like, temporary, permanent. I wouldn't worry about it. Just say you get this allocation. However you want to use that allocation of signage, square footage, and amount, it's up to you as a business, but that's what you get. Most ordinances specifically list the types of temporary signs: banners, papers, sandwich boards. The sandwich boards I showed you earlier, typically those are considered to be temporary because there's not a permanent mount on those. Tethered balloons, all those things. Some regulations prohibit them altogether, while others specify a length of time that they can be up. So these would be considered temporary signs, so like a now open type of sign, a banner sign on the top of a building. These things have a way of staying up for quite a while if no one's actually asking questions. And so to me, if that becomes a real headache in your community, if people are doing very inexpensive, cheap forms of signage, you can just say, well, that's your signage allocation right there. It doesn't look good, but that's the way you want to appear, so be it, but that's what you get, and you don't get any more signage after that. Other types of temporary signs would be sale signs and those sorts of things. One of the key things to look at in terms of sale signs, if you get into having to enforce that with businesses, is that a sale sign is usually bound for a time period. There's a restaurant not too far from my house, and it says afternoon lunch specials to AT&T customers, or AT&T workers. There's an AT&T office not too far from us. It doesn't say this week only, or for the next day, or whatever. It just says lunch special AT&T workers. That sign has never been removed. It's up there perpetually. That is their special. So really, to me, that starts to become part of their overall signage allocation. So half price sale this weekend only. Those are the things that when they're time bound, that's what starts to discern between a temporary sign and a permanent sign. Bandit signs, they can be a real issue in a lot of communities. Real estate signs and political signs are different animal, even though they'll sometimes somewhat have the same impact visually out there on the street. Generally, most things cannot be mounted on telephone poles in most municipalities. It's illegal, it's an obstruction to the workers. They're not supposed to be up there, so generally they can come down when they're up there. Parked vehicle signs is another biggie. Here's my favorite one. This is down in Kentucky. We were doing a seminar down there, and I couldn't pass that one up. This guy went out and bought an old U.S. mail vehicle. He drives this thing in early every morning, and he plugs the meters all day long in front of the Merrill Lynch office. Perfectly legal, unless you have a parking ordinance that says your vehicle has to move every certain amount of times. Even if it's at a meter, he's plugging the meter, you can still amend the ordinance to say that you can park there up to 2 hours, but after that you have to move it. And so that'd be the way to deal with that. But he's entitled to do this absolutely with free speech. Okay, so we can't take away from that.
We're savings pretty quick.
Yeah, you throwing quarters in the meters. Yeah, that's right. They need to raise the meters. Isn't it just in that block only, right? So, This is not too far from where I live in San Antonio. This is Floor's Country Store. This is one of those small, sort of they call hilltown, country town, village towns outside of San Antonio. Willie Nelson plays there every now and then. We saw B.B. King 2 years ago, and I think the tickets were like $30, and we were in the third row. It's like, how does this happen, you know? So anyway, it's a great old place. But, you know, if I was the city administrator, I'd be really scratching my head over, okay, this place is an institution. How do you do this? So do you landmark the truck? You know, that's kind of its ambience, a little bit funky. No one else is doing it. You know, but if everyone starts doing it downtown, then it's going to get a little bit carried away. So that's one of those things, again, you kind of want to have a little bit of an eye to that. You actually don't see the rest of their signs back behind me, but it almost gets a little bit worse. But generally what happens in this situation, if you want to address it, how long the vehicle can be parked on the street. The vehicle has to have proper tags and inspections. Those are all ways in which you can kind of start to regulate those things. But if that is the Floor's Country Store delivery truck, they have every right, I guess, to park there for whatever length of time on the street. You know, obviously it's taken away from customer parking. But this is one of those things that's kind of a, you know, to me it's kind of a little bit of a gray area. These are also starting to be qualified as signage. Some municipalities have tried to regulate that out. That's the billboards that change as you drive around. Communities are starting to say, you know, that's obstruction of traffic and unneeded, and they're trying to discourage that. And this one I saw in Rio 4 years ago, and you're only seeing part of them. These are they're called something mates or something like that. It's basically, I think it was like hot chocolate or something like that. And these guys are all on the same motorcycles. They line up and they ride together. You imagine, you know, like 6 of these guys taking off and hitting it going through your town. Kind of loud. Not sure that I really want to see that drive around my town all the time. But again, it's done in a concerted way to market the product. And so again, you know, what becomes a sign in your commercial district? All right, so the sign dimensions, number, location. The problem with a lot of ordinances is they specify a variety of different size limits based on the different types of signs, and often based on content. And as I said before, forget the content side of it. You have to kind of, it's always a hard thing to enforce. And what I'm trying to get at here is that in smaller communities, it's hard to justify a staff person, a code officer, to always go around and play games with people on their signs. So the simpler we can make the sign ordinance, the easier it is to administer, the easier it is to understand, and the businesses themselves won't feel like they're being restricted as much by saying no to this, no to that, no to this. If you just say, we don't care what your sign says, as long as it's legal, it has to be legal, and we're just going to give you a total allotment. You go figure out how you want to use that on your building facade. Here you go. Okay, I'm the sign administrator, and it's my job to go through this commercial district once a month and see who's put up new signs. I have better things to do with my time than to count all the signs on this building facade. You know, so it starts to get to be a little bit of a headache after a while. You know, all the signs that are there. You know, what's a sign there? So it gets to be a lot. So include total limits on the sign area on a particular property, including the building and the land. Separate, or there's 2 different ways to do it. You can include total limits on the sign area on a particular property, including the building and the land. Some separate the building and the land. I would say do both, and here's why. This starts to head off the whole idea of what you call off-premise signage. And a great example of off-premise sign is if you go straight up the street here, on the corner there's a sign that says Holiday Inn this way. That's considered to be an off-premise sign. And so rather than go up there and impact that person that owns the property and say you can't do this and all that, you could say, okay, that's how much signage you get on your property. If you build on this property, can't do anything else in terms of signage because it's a Holiday Inn sign that you've decided that you want to allocate your signage resource to. So if they want to do billboards, if they want to advertise, whatever on their property, it falls out into a total amount on your property. That's what you can do. If you want to go to Miller Lite and say, I've got a billboard space on the side of my wall, I want to rent it to you, great. That's considered to be a sign because you're advertising a product. that's all you get then as a business. So that starts to be a little bit easier to administer and discern between on-premise, off-premise, billboards, and those sorts of things. In determining total sign area, you can tie it to the street frontage, the building facade area, or a combination. But all these things, though, are generally fast and easy, which means the administration is easier to do. Sign area, how do you measure that sign area? Let me kind of jump ahead here quickly. Is it the outer areas that kind of frame the letters, or is it the letters themselves? And that's one of those things generally people will kind of look at is where's the contrast of materials occur at, what's framing out the overall sign. In this instance, I'd be tempted to say it's probably more the green area that is with the overall sign. Good one here. What's the sign? Is it this overall upper facade, which the letter is worked into, or is it just the lettering itself? And so those are one of those other things that you kind of have to get comfortable with in terms of defining sign area. Typically, it's measured as an area defined within the outer boundaries of the standard geometric shapes contained and defined by the extreme reaches of informational or graphic parts of the sign. So let me go back here. As if I just written that, that would mean that would be the outer edge of the O, and up in here, that is what kind of links all that together. That would be your sign area, versus that. So I would say the rest of that's facade, and then the lettering itself is just the sign. That's a lot of type. If you want to have standard language about how to do that, I'd be happy to pass that on to you or email that to you. Limits on the number of signs to prevent clutter. This is where I go down to is to keep my sign ordinance as simple as possible, is to say you get 3 different types of signs. You can have a flush mounted sign, you can have a projecting sign, and you can have signs on your windows. And each of those things are based on square footage of your overall front lot line and your overall lot. So those are fairly simple computations. So again, that makes it easy for someone to administer. It makes it easy for the sign designer to understand. It makes it easy for the property owner or the business owner to understand. So you could say you're entitled to X amount of square footage on a flush mounted sign up to 35 square feet. You're entitled to X amount of square footage for your storefront window sign up to X amount of square footage. And you can have minimum threshold, you can have maximum thresholds if you want to do that based on sizes of the facade. Again, that's part of doing that inventory that I was talking about at the very early on. Time and temperature signs, does anyone have any issues on time and temperature signs? Good, we're gonna keep going then. Colors and materials. I would say that if that's really important for you, that you come up with a specific palette of colors. Otherwise, if you don't recommend a specific palette of colors, you kind of become the color police. And that's where it gets, again, very subjective. The other thing that you can do in terms of colors is you can say no more than 3 colors. Again, that kind of takes away from a little bit of the creativity, because there's someone that might want to paint some sort of scene on the sign, because that's important, and that might have blended colors. So what becomes a color there? So again, I think probably be as specific as you can in terms of the materials, if that's important for you. If you do materials, again, I would say have a wide variety of materials. Otherwise, all your signage is going to start to kind of feel like a strip center in the downtown area as well. You may want to say something like all the brackets need to be done out of metal, if that sort of thematic approach is really important for your commercial district, but then let them have entire flexibility about what those mounting brackets look like, so you can get a little bit of creativity going in that regards. I already talked about colors. Sign lighting. My personal opinion here is that internally lit signs really kind of do take away from the landscape. We've gotten a little bit better about doing these, but next time you're out walking around, take a look at the signs that you really enjoy looking at versus the ones you kind of look at and you walk and you turn back away from. Chances are the ones you look at and you turn away from kind of quickly are the internally lit signs, and that's because the light is really kind of coming directly into your eye. Signs that have lights that shine onto them and are reflected will capture the viewer's attention for a longer period of time. And so that's why I like the indirect lighting that shines onto the sign and bounces off. Then you start to get a play of shade and shadow, and some materials can shine, whereas your blacklit plastic signs really don't do that as much. So here's a good example. the indirect external lighting, that play of light bouncing off of there, that's a little more attractive versus that just glaring in your eyes. Again, in terms of illumination, the light bulbs, what's illumination, those sorts of things. Menu boards, vending machines, the menu boards or the A-frame signs, I like to have a provision in there that the sign has to have some sort of frame around it, and the frame has to have some sort of dimensional quality to it. I think that gives it a little bit more of an enduring, permanent feeling, and also that probably jumps you up a grade from the inexpensive signs that you can buy out of the retail catalogs that you just move the channel letters in, because they don't have frames on them, and so that means that you're probably dealing with some more of either something that people are going to hand write on in terms of a chalkboard or something like that, or it won't be an inexpensive sign that they did in their garage the night before. On-premise, off-premise signs, we talked a little bit about that already, and billboards. Again, the way to deal with this to me is, well, first of all, have some limits on size of signs. The truly amazing Kirby. This is Branson, Missouri. What can I say? You know, so Branson's master magician. He just made downtown Branson disappear. If you don't discern between on-premise and off-premise signs, and you just say you're allotted this amount of sign, and somebody wants to put up a billboard on their property, good, that's your sign, that's all you get. They may not like that, but I think it stops your downtown from becoming a plethora of billboards overall. So anyway, let's see. Blinking signs, these are, again, there's kind of pros and cons to these. Some of your historical neon signs had a lot of movement in them. Let's see if I can, typically though, it's based on frequency of cycles or your videos, there we go. And your new digital signs. I kind of like to discourage these from in downtowns depending upon the retail mix. As I think I said at the very beginning, if you're a nightclub, an entertainment district, maybe there's the opportunity for that, and we have some very specific sizes that happen as a result of that, but just to kind of let it go at any size and any time might be a little bit much for most. Sonic drive-ins, a lot of those now have the digital ones that are out there. These things can be very bright. There was actually an intersection when we were working in Branson where somebody had one of these up. It was so bright when you came up to there at night that the traffic signals couldn't be seen. So you have to watch, because you can't control what that video is going to be. What it looks like on one day can be something completely different. And they had something that was very light and bright that they were trying to advertise. When all those lights came on at night, you couldn't see the traffic intersections. And then we just go the last part here. These are what you can do in terms of starting to kind of do the modeling for people and what things look like. And this is the value of playing around with PowerPoint. This is removing a lot of the temporary signs. And then if your sign ordinance allows them two different types of signs, what would that look like in the scale? So when you start to do the sign ordinance, do that type of modeling for the businesses. So there again, that shows what you could do with two different size allocations, one being flush mounted, one being projecting. Downsizing your monument signs, especially in urban areas where you have gas stations. Generally, you don't need to have real high standard pier signs, and you can go with something that's more of a smaller scale monument sign. That works just as well. Well-placed signage, again, there's no way to kind of legislate good taste and design sometimes, but take the clues from the building about where things should be placed. These are old recessed panels up in here, which are really kind of designed for the signs. Here it's covered over the transom window, and the building doesn't start to read as well as a result of that. This is one we were working on in Sydney, Nebraska. This had the great old, this is a modified storefront from the original, but the neon on here, this is really kind of one of those cool landmark things that everyone identified with in the downtown area. We said, well, let's keep the Wilson-Tobin part of the 1950s remodeling, but the 1970s prescriptions, it's kind of understood that they sell prescriptions. That's starting to get to be a bit much. And so again, just downsizing the signage on there and repainting went a long ways. And again, tastefully done things. And that's one of the things we haven't really talked about, the awnings. I would say that we classify letterings on awnings to be a sign, and it's not just this in terms of your sign. I would use the whole color boundaries of the awning to be your overall sign when you start to look at what determines the sign area overall. So anyway, there you go. That's a quick tour of signage, some tips about what you can and can expect, and some things that can happen with good sign ordinances. Questions, comments? Okay. I'll stick around a little bit later on. If anybody wants a copy of the text, I'll be happy to give you a copy of the text. Give me your email and I can I'll send you that. I can't send all the images because they're too large a bank of images, but I'm happy to give you the copies of the text part of that. So great. Well, thank you.
Thank you.